Well, the nonprofit Bread for the World Institute says improving agriculture on small farms is critical to reducing hunger. In its 2015 hunger report, When Women Flourish, We Can End Hunger, Bread for the World says because a majority of those engaged in small-scale farming are women, there is need to achieve greater gender equality and eliminate discrimination against women and girls as a way to fight hunger. For more insight, I'm joined by Faustine Wabwire, a senior foreign assistance policy analyst at the Bread for the World Institute. Ms. Wabwire, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, we know that in South Sudan, of course, there are other factors that have contributed to food insecurity. But in your report, you say generally across the continent, women are the major producers of the food that sustains all the populations across the continent. And
right.
Therefore, why is it important to focus on them?
As you rightly say, Vincent, evidence shows that actually between 60 to 70% of the food that's produced on the continent is through women's efforts around the world, around the continent. And so as part of bringing this issue to the fore, it's difficult for policymakers to really address the issue and contribute to food security of countries and families and communities unless there's that targeted approach, understanding who is contributing to the agricultural productivity of the country and national economies.
Yeah. Now, you know, small-scale farming has been a traditional activity of all communities in Africa. Do you get a sense that perhaps because it has never been taken to a level where it is seen as a commercial venture, that it doesn't necessarily fit into a national policy? It is taken for granted as just some activity that is there and will always be there?
Absolutely. In our report, we actually touch on the issue of unpaid care. And when you look at that at a more deeper level, you realize that a lot of the contribution and efforts that women are making, including growing food and caring for the family and nurturing and preparing food, are actually efforts that are not seen as part of the economy, and yet they really do matter. And especially because if women had more access to productive resources, for example, just extension services, better access to seeds, to credit, this would make a big difference to national economies.
Now, very quickly, why is it that women don't have access to credit right now as we speak?
It's simply gender discrimination. It's very interesting. People don't often think about it like that. So when you open this conversation, somebody would immediately say, well, men too. But you need to look at the data, and that's why the report really puts an emphasis on data, availability of data to inform policy making. Because without that, then we really are just doing a lot of work without understanding what makes difference. How about the argument that
most of the land, say in Africa, is actually family-owned? It's held in trust by the entire family. So all those people who work on the farm are just members of the family. It doesn't necessarily belong to the woman.
That's what we think. But you visit some of these families and you actually realize that there's a distinction between who grows what kinds of crops, for example. We were in Rwanda and Malawi as part of preparing this report. And we would often hear stories of these are male crops and these are women crops. So, for example, the cash crops would tend to be in the hands of men, whereas other staple foods would be hands of women, in which case, if there's some expectation of income, then you can realize that women are not having access to that.
In less than a minute, what is it you would tell, say, the government of Africa and any other organization that they should do to make it possible for women to produce more, but also gain and benefit personally from agricultural activities?
First of all, I think there needs to be fulfillment of the commitments that governments have made, especially in Africa. The Maputo Declaration 10 years ago, only a handful of African countries have fulfilled this. That's at overall level. Secondly, then, be more targeted. Understand who is producing the food, what are their needs, and understand better the needs of men and women as relates to the agriculture economy of the countries.
Right, and I believe, remember always that the mamas are the ones who really feed the continent.
We should remember that all the time.
Not big commercial farms.
Absolutely.
Well, Faustine, thank you very much for sharing your insights with us. Well, Faustine Wabwire is a senior foreign assistance policy analyst at the Bread for the World Institute. We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com.